I'm Tabitha, 28 female. I live in a small but cozy apartment that smells perpetually of vanilla, sandalwood, and drying lavender, the signature scents of my online business. From my spare bedroom, I run a company that I built from scratch, pouring my heart into creating artisan home goods that people seem to love. It's been a long, difficult, and incredibly rewarding journey, one that I thought my family would be proud of. But as I would soon learn, some people's support is only as deep as their own understanding, and their smiles can hide a world of condescension, ready to surface at the first sign of what they perceive as weakness. This is the story of how I traded their hollow support for solid assets, and how a quiet online entrepreneur ended up owning the very legacy my aunt and cousin believed made them superior. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. It all started, as these things often do, at a family dinner. Specifically, my Aunt Brenda's annual spring gathering. Brenda loved any excuse to play the grand hostess in her meticulously decorated home, a living showroom for her boutique, the Gilded Lily. Every surface was adorned with something she sold: porcelain birds, potpourri bowls, and framed inspirational quotes in elegant calligraphy. The air was thick with the scent of roasted chicken and passive aggression. My grandfather, Arthur, was there, his warm, quiet presence a comforting anchor in the swirling currents of family dynamics. My cousin, Jessica, was holding court by the fireplace, phone in hand, likely documenting the evening for her thousands of followers. And then there was me, Tabitha, trying to find a place to set my plate that wasn't occupied by a decorative ceramic rabbit. I loved my family, I truly did, but our definitions of success were worlds apart. To Aunt Brenda and her daughter, Jessica, success was tangible, traditional, and most importantly, visible to the community. Brenda's boutique on Main Street was a local institution, a place where people had bought wedding gifts and sympathy cards for 20 years. Jessica's success was modern but equally visible, a curated online life as a lifestyle influencer, complete with brand deals from mainstream cosmetic companies and sponsored trips to beach resorts. My success, on the other hand, was invisible. It existed in spreadsheets, shipping notifications, and glowing online reviews from strangers across the country. My workshop was a converted corner of my apartment, not a storefront with a charming bell over the door. "Tabitha, darling," Aunt Brenda began, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness as she approached me. "How is your little candle business going? Are you still making those soaps in your kitchen?" I managed a tight smile. "It's going well, Aunt Brenda. We actually expanded into textiles this year, hand-dyed linens. And it's not just in my kitchen anymore, I have a dedicated workspace." "Oh, that's lovely," she said, her eyes glazing over, the information clearly not registering as significant. "You know, the Gilded Lily is looking for a part-time sales associate. Weekends. It would be a great way for you to get out of the house, earn some stable income. Something a bit more secure." The offer hung in the air, a perfect little grenade of an insult wrapped in a bow of concern. Before I could formulate a polite refusal, Jessica drifted over, her phone now mercifully tucked away. She had the effortless confidence of someone who had never truly been challenged. "Mom, don't be silly," Jessica said with a laugh, but it wasn't in my defense. "Tabitha loves her hobby, it's cute." She turned to me, her smile wide but not reaching her eyes. "Honestly, Tabby, I admire the passion. But Mom's right, you should think about a real career path. My friend just got a junior marketing position at my firm. I could probably get you an interview. It's time to start thinking about a 401k, you know." The dual assault was classic Brenda and Jessica. One offered a job that was a clear step down, implying my current work was insufficient, while the other offered a path to a real job, implying my business was a childish pastime. It was a well-practiced routine designed to keep me in my place as the quaint, artistic cousin who hadn't quite figured out the real world yet. "Thanks for the offers," I said, keeping my voice even. "But my business is my career. It's more than stable. In fact, I'm looking to hire my first employee soon. This information was met with polite, disbelieving silence. My grandfather, however, who had been quietly observing from his armchair, gave me a subtle, encouraging nod. He understood. He had started his own carpentry workshop with nothing but 2 hands and a set of old tools, and he'd turned it into a respected busin. That supported his family for 40 years. He knew what it took. He knew my work wasn't a hobby. The conversation shifted, but the theme of the evening was set. For the next hour, I was treated to a highlight reel of Jessica's recent successes. She talked about her engagement metrics, a brand deal with a national jewelry chain, and her upcoming trip to Bali, all expenses paid, of course. Aunt Brenda beamed, interjecting with proud anecdotes. "Jessica has such a wonderful eye for business," she'd say. "She's a natural." Throughout it all, I felt a familiar frustration building. It wasn't just that they didn't understand my business, it was that they didn't want to. To them, my quiet, steady growth was unglamorous. It didn't involve a fancy title or a physical location they could point to. They couldn't comprehend how selling handmade goods on the internet could possibly equate to their vision of a successful life. The evening wore on, a slow drip of condescending remarks and backhanded compliments. I was asked if I had a business license for that little online thingy and whether I paid taxes on that extra cash. Each question was a small paper cut, a reminder of my perceived status in the family hierarchy. As I was leaving, Brenda gave me a hug and whispered, "Don't forget about that sales position, dear. The offer stands. It's always good to have a backup plan." It was the final straw, a confirmation that in their eyes I was always just one step away from failure, and my dream was nothing more than a temporary diversion before I came to my senses and got a real job, preferably one they had graciously secured for me. Driving home that night, the scent of Brenda's potpourri clinging to my clothes, I wasn't angry. I was motivated. They saw my business as a joke. One day, very soon, I would make sure they understood just how serious it was. They just needed the right frame of reference. The condescension wasn't a new phenomenon. It had been the background music of my entrepreneurial journey since day one. When I first announced, 5 years ago, that I was leaving my stable but soul-crushing graphic design job to start my own business, the reactions were predictable. My grandfather Arthur was my staunchest supporter. He sat me down in his workshop, the air rich with the scent of sawdust and varnish, and told me, "The world needs people who make things with their hands, Tabi. Don't ever let anyone tell you that's not a real job." He gave me my first loan, a modest $500 from his pension, which I used to buy high-quality waxes and essential oils. I paid him back, with interest, within 6 months. My Aunt Brenda and Jessica, however, treated my announcement like a whimsical phase I was going through. "Oh, how creative," Brenda had said, her tone the same one she used for a child's macaroni art project. "It'll be nice for you to have a little project to keep you busy." Jessica, ever the pragmatist, immediately pointed out the flaws. "The market is so saturated, Tabi. Everyone on Etsy is making candles. You won't have benefits or a retirement plan. Is that really a smart move?" Their concern was wrapped in a veneer of family love, but underneath it was a deep-seated skepticism. They couldn't see the vision. They only saw the risk, the deviation from the safe, corporate path they valued. In the early days, their support came in the form of well-meaning but utterly useless advice. Brenda would send me articles about the importance of brick-and-mortar retail, completely ignoring my e-commerce business model. "You need a physical presence, dear," she'd insist. "People need to see and touch the products. Your little website is fine, but you'll never grow without a real shop." She would then, of course, suggest a small, overpriced kiosk at the local mall, demonstrating her complete lack of understanding of my brand, my target audience, and my profit margins. Jessica's advice was even more infuriating. As a social media influencer, she believed she was an expert on all things digital. She would critique my Instagram feed, telling me my aesthetic was too niche, and that I needed to use more trending sounds on my reels, regardless of whether they fit my brand's calm, minimalist vibe. "You need to be more commercial, Tabi," she'd say, scrolling through her own feed filled with brightly filtered photos of her posing with mass-produced products. Nobody gets rich being authentic. You have to play the game. What they never bothered to ask about were the numbers. They never asked about my conversion rates, my customer acquisition costs, or my monthly revenue growth. They didn't know that my little hobby had cleared 6 figures in its 3rd year, or that I had a customer return rate of over 60%. They didn't see the late nights I spent packing orders, the weekends I dedicated to product development, or the sheer terror and exhilaration of being completely responsible for my own livelihood. They only saw what I wasn't. I wasn't an employee with a predictable salary. I wasn't a shop owner on Main Street they could boast about to their friends. I was an anomaly, and my success, happening quietly in the digital realm, didn't fit their narrative. There was one incident, about a year before that fateful dinner, that truly crystallized their attitude for me. Brenda's boutique, the Gilded Lily, was celebrating its 20th anniversary. She was throwing a huge party and had invited local press and business owners. She asked me to create custom-scented candles as party favors. I was thrilled. This felt like a breakthrough, a moment where she was finally acknowledging my business as legitimate. I spent 2 weeks developing a unique scent I called Gilded Garden, a blend of peony, rose, and sandalwood. I poured, wicked, and labeled 200 candles, putting my own inventory on hold to meet her deadline. I delivered them, beautifully packaged, and charged her only my raw material cost, considering it a combination of a gift and a marketing opportunity. At the party, I watched as guests gushed over the candles. Several people asked me for my business card. I felt a swell of pride, but then I overheard Brenda talking to the editor of the local newspaper. "Aren't they lovely?" Brenda said, holding up one of my candles. "We're thinking of launching our own line of home fragrances here at the Gilded Lily. This is just a little something I whipped up as a sample." She took full credit. She didn't mention my name or my business. It wasn't malicious, I realized. In her mind, because she had the idea and commissioned them, they were essentially her creation. My role as the artisan, the actual creator, was secondary. I was just the help. When I later saw the article in the paper, it mentioned the boutique's exclusive new candle line, personally developed by owner Brenda. There was no mention of me. I never confronted her about it. It would have caused a massive family rift, and I knew she would paint me as ungrateful. But the incident taught me a valuable lesson. To Brenda and Jessica, my business was not a real entity. It was a resource they could tap into, a skill I possessed that could be useful to them, but it wasn't a brand or a company to be respected in its own right. My success was only valid if it could be absorbed into their own. From that day forward, I stopped sharing my wins with them. I never mentioned my big orders, my features in prominent blogs, or my plans for expansion. I let them continue to believe I was running a cute little hobby out of my apartment. Their ignorance was a shield. It protected me from their critiques, their backhanded compliments, and their attempts to co-opt my hard work. I knew, with a quiet certainty, that one day they would have to acknowledge my success. But it would be on my terms, not theirs, and it would be undeniable. The seeds of disrespect they had sown for years were about to bear some very unexpected fruit. Life continued on its parallel tracks. My business, Hearth and Root, was thriving. The new line of hand-dyed linens had been an incredible success, and I was now in negotiations with a small, curated chain of boutique hotels to become their exclusive supplier of bedding and bath amenities. It was a game-changing deal that would require me to move out of my apartment workspace and into a proper commercial studio. I was spending my days analyzing lease agreements and planning logistics, feeling the electric buzz of growth and possibility. Meanwhile, in the world of Brenda and Jessica, things were business as usual. Jessica's social media posts were a constant stream of sponsored content and aspirational lifestyle shots. Brenda continued to run the Gilded Lily, posting about new arrivals and sidewalk sales on the town's community Facebook page. From the outside, everything seemed fine. The first crack in their facade appeared subtly. I was scrolling through the town's page one evening, looking for updates on a local farmer's market, when I saw a post from another Main Street shop owner. It was a gushing tribute to Brenda, thanking her for her 20 years in business and wishing her well on her next chapter. It was oddly final in its tone. A few comments underneath asked what was happening, but the original poster was vague, just saying, "Brenda's ready for a new adventure." I felt a prickle of curiosity but dismissed it. Brenda would have told the family if she was closing the store. It was her entire identity. A week later, my grandfather called me. "Tabby, have you spoken to your aunt lately?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "Not since that dinner a few months ago," I admitted. "Why, is everything okay?" There was a pause. "I'm not sure," he said slowly. I stopped by the shop to say hello, and she seemed stressed. Said something about the landlord raising the rent again. She tried to laugh it off, but she looked worried, honey. My grandfather had a knack for seeing past the polished exterior people presented. If he was worried, there was a reason to be. The Gilded Lily was located in a prime spot on Main Street, in a historic building that was coveted by other businesses. The building's owner was a notoriously tough negotiator who was known for prioritizing profits over loyalty to long-term tenants. If Brenda's lease was up for renewal, she was likely facing a significant increase she couldn't afford. Her business model was archaic. She had no online store, relied solely on foot traffic, and catered to an aging demographic. In the age of Amazon and specialty e-commerce, her boutique was a relic, a sinking ship propped up by nostalgia and Brenda's sheer force of will. The confirmation came 2 weeks later, not from Brenda, but from a discreet listing on a commercial real estate website. I had been browsing the site for potential studio spaces for Hearth and Root when I decided, on a whim, to search for retail properties on Main Street. And there it was. It wasn't listed under the name, The Gilded Lily. The address was unmistakable, but the listing was generic. Prime retail space for sale, business, and assets included. The agent was trying to be discreet, likely to prevent Brenda's regular customers from panicking. The description was heartbreakingly optimistic, talking about a beloved local business with a loyal customer base and a turnkey opportunity for a passionate new owner. But the numbers, included in a downloadable prospectus, told the real story. Sales had been declining steadily for 5 years. The profit margins were razor-thin. The inventory was overvalued, and there was a significant amount of debt owed to suppliers. The asking price for the business itself was surprisingly low, but the catch was that the sale was contingent on assuming the new, exorbitant 5-year lease. The landlord wanted a new tenant locked in at the higher rate. For any sane business person, it was a terrible deal. You'd be buying a failing business and handcuffing yourself to an unsustainable rent payment. Brenda wasn't just selling, she was desperately trying to escape a financial trap of her own making. She was in a crisis. I sat there, staring at the screen, a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. There was a pang of sympathy for my aunt. Her life's work was crumbling. But that sympathy was quickly overshadowed by the memory of every condescending comment, every dismissive remark, every time she and Jessica had made me feel small and foolish for daring to build something of my own. They, who saw my data-driven, profitable, and scalable online business as a cute hobby, were now being crushed by the very traditional model they worshipped. The irony was so thick I could taste it. And then an idea began to form. It was audacious, terrifying, and utterly perfect. The location was incredible. The building was beautiful. The business inside it was failing, but the space itself. It was exactly what Hearth and Root needed to grow to the next level. I could use the front as a stunning, minimalist showroom, a physical flagship for my online brand, and the large, unused backroom and basement would be the perfect space for my new production studio and fulfillment center. The deal was poison for someone wanting to continue running the Gilded Lily. But for someone with a completely different, modern, and profitable business model to plug into it, it was a golden opportunity. I wouldn't just be buying a building, I would be buying the very symbol of their condescension. My heart started to race. This was bigger than just getting a new studio. This was a chance to rewrite the family narrative, to demonstrate the power of the business they had so casually dismissed. They had spent years offering me unsolicited advice and backup plans for my inevitable failure. Now, I had the chance to become their only way out. I closed the real estate tab and opened a new one, typing the name of the one person I knew could help me navigate this complex and delicate situation: David, my business attorney. The time for quiet, invisible success was over. It was time to make a very visible move. My meeting with David took place the following afternoon in his quiet, book-lined office. David was a calm, methodical man in his early 50s, with a sharp mind that missed nothing. He had helped me incorporate Hearth and Root, reviewed my supplier contracts, and offered sound advice at every stage of my growth. He was more than a lawyer, he was a trusted advisor who had always taken my little candle business very seriously. I laid out the situation, showing him the real estate listing and the financial prospectus for the Gilded Lily. He listened intently, peering at the documents through his reading glasses, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "So, let me get this straight," he said. "Your aunt is selling her business under duress. The business itself is losing money, but it's tied to a prime piece of real estate with a new, very high lease agreement that you would have to assume." "That's the gist of it," I confirmed, my stomach churning with a mixture of nerves and excitement. "And you want to buy it," he stated, not as a question, but as a confirmation. "You want to buy her failing business, take on a lease that's likely 40% above market rate, and use the space for your own, completely different company." "When you put it like that, it sounds crazy," I admitted. "It is a little crazy, Tabitha," he said with a slight smile. "It's a bold, aggressive, and highly unconventional move. I love it." A wave of relief washed over me. "But," he continued, holding up a finger, "we have to be smart. This can't be an emotional decision. We need to look at this deal with cold, hard logic. Your personal history with your aunt and cousin is the seasoning, not the main course. The main course has to be whether this makes financial sense for Hearth and Root." For the next 2 hours, we dissected the deal. David's perspective was invaluable. He saw potential pitfalls I had completely overlooked. The biggest hurdle was the landlord. "This guy doesn't want another small-time retailer who might go under in a year," David explained. "He wants a tenant with a proven track record of growth and profitability. He wants security. Your aunt can't provide that, which is why she's in this mess. You, on the other hand, can." Our strategy began to take shape. The key was to separate the two transactions in our approach. First, there was the purchase of the business assets from my Aunt Brenda. Second, there was the negotiation of the lease with the landlord. We had to tackle the second part first, but covertly. David suggested we create a new LLC, a shell corporation with a generic name, to approach the landlord. This would keep my name, and Hearth and Root, out of it until the last possible moment, preventing any family drama from derailing the deal before it even began. "We'll go to the landlord through this LLC," David outlined, sketching a flowchart on a legal pad. "We'll present him with Hearth and Root's financials, anonymously, as the backing for this new LLC. We'll show him your revenue growth, your profit margins, your business plan for the hotel contract. We'll prove to him that we are the stable, long-term tenant he's been dreaming of. We won't just agree to his high rent. We'll use our stability to negotiate better terms. Maybe a slightly lower rate in exchange for signing a 10-year lease instead of 5. It was brilliant. By securing the lease agreement with the landlord first, we would hold all the cards. Brenda's ability to sell her business to anyone else was entirely dependent on that lease. Once we had it locked down, she would have no choice but to sell the business assets to our LLC, as we would be the only entity the landlord would approve as the new tenant. The next step was due diligence on the Gilded Lily itself. David hired a forensic accountant to go through the prospectus with a fine-tooth comb. The report that came back a week later was grim, but it confirmed my suspicions. The business was in worse shape than I thought. Brenda had been taking out high-interest loans to cover inventory costs and had been paying herself a salary the business couldn't actually afford. The loyal customer base was shrinking every year, and the inventory was a hodgepodge of dated items that would be difficult to liquidate. The accountant's final assessment was stark. The business has a net value of essentially zero. The only real assets are the store fixtures and the name, which has some minor local goodwill. This was the ammunition we needed. We now knew exactly what we were buying: a name, some shelves, and a whole lot of financial desperation. David drafted an offer letter from our anonymous LLC. We offered a price for the business that was low, but fair, considering the debt and the dire financial situation. It was enough for Brenda to pay off her suppliers, settle her debts, and walk away with a small nest egg, far more than she would get if the business simply went bankrupt and she was evicted. The offer was a lifeline, even if she didn't know who was throwing it. We sent the offer to the commercial real estate agent representing Brenda. Now, all we could do was wait. I spent the next few days in a state of suspended animation. I continued to run Hearth and Root, packing orders and responding to Stomer emails, but my mind was elsewhere. I was picturing the look on my aunt's face, on Jessica's face when they found out. Would they be angry, humiliated, or, in a tiny corner of my heart, I wondered, would they finally be proud? The call came from David a week later. "They've accepted the offer," he said, his voice calm and professional. Brenda's lawyer reviewed it and advised her to take it. It seems it was the only offer she received. The agent is drawing up the papers. I sank into my chair, my hands trembling slightly. It was happening. It was real. "Phase 1 is complete," David continued. "Now for Phase 2. I've already opened a dialogue with the landlord's attorney. We're going to get that lease, Tabitha. Get ready to move into your new headquarters." Hanging up the phone, I looked around my cramped apartment workshop, at the boxes of supplies and the shelves overflowing with my creations. It had been my sanctuary and my launching pad. But now, a new future was unfolding, one that would take place on Main Street, in a building that represented so much more than just commercial space. It represented the culmination of years of quiet, relentless work, and the final, irrefutable answer to their years of doubt. The next few weeks were a masterclass in corporate maneuvering, orchestrated by David with the precision of a seasoned general. While Brenda and her lawyer worked with the real estate agent on the sale of the Gilded Lily, David and I were engaged in a completely separate, high-stakes negotiation with the building's owner, a formidable real estate mogul named Mr. Harrison. We operated entirely through the shell LLC David had created, Northwood Holdings Group. It sounded official, anonymous, and most importantly, had no connection to me or my family. Our pitch to Mr. Harrison was simple and powerful. We weren't just another small business. We were a rapidly growing e-commerce brand with a proven, multi-year track record of profitability. We provided him with 3 years of Hearth and Root's financials, redacted to remove the company name, but showing a clear and impressive upward trajectory. We included projections that factored in the new boutique hotel contract. We weren't just asking for a lease. We were presenting him with a partnership that would guarantee his investment for the next decade. David's prediction was spot on. Mr. Harrison wasn't interested in nostalgia or supporting a beloved local shop. He was interested in a reliable return on his investment. We were offering him exactly that. The negotiation was intense. David was a brilliant strategist, pushing for concessions I wouldn't have even thought to ask for: a 3-month rent abatement period to allow for renovations, a cap on future property tax pass-throughs, and the right of first refusal if he ever decided to sell the building. In return, we offered to sign a 10-year lease, giving him the long-term stability he craved. After a week of back and forth, we had a deal. Mr. Harrison's lawyer sent over the lease agreement for Northwood Holdings Group to sign. It was a massive, intimidating document, but it represented victory. The space was ours. Meanwhile, on Brenda's side of the fence, things were moving much more slowly. Her lawyer was less experienced in commercial transactions, and the process was fraught with delays. I received updates through David, who was in contact with her real estate agent. Brenda, it seemed, was in a fragile emotional state. She was mourning the loss of her life's work and was apparently telling friends she was selling to a wonderful investment group from out of state who really believe in the legacy of the shop. The narrative she was spinning was one of a graceful exit, a passing of the torch. She had no idea the investment group was her niece, who planned to dismantle that legacy entirely. The dual tracks of the transaction were surreal. On one hand, I was planning the layout for my new studio and showroom. I hired an architect to draw up plans for a gut renovation of the space. The front would be a bright, airy retail area showcasing Hearth and Root products. The back and basement would become a state-of-the-art production and shipping facility. It was the physical manifestation of all my dreams. On the other hand, I had to listen to my grandfather talk about how worried he was for Brenda. "She's putting on a brave face, Tabby," he told me over the phone. "But she's heartbroken, says she just couldn't keep up with the changing times." I felt a twinge of guilt, but I pushed it down. This wasn't personal. It was business. And Brenda had made her own business decisions for the last 20 years. The most nerve-wracking part was the closing. Because we were dealing with two separate legal agreements, the asset purchase from Brenda and the lease from Mr. Harrison, David arranged for two separate closings on the same day. He handled the lease signing with Mr. Harrison's team in the morning. The documents were signed, the funds were transferred, and Northwood Holdings Group officially became the new tenant of the Main Street property. The second closing, the one for the purchase of the Gilded Lily, was scheduled for that afternoon. David advised me not to attend. My presence would reveal the game too early and could jeopardize the sale. He would go as the legal representative of Northwood Holdings. Brenda would be there, signing over her business to a faceless corporation. She would hand over the keys and walk away, believing she was done. The plan was to let the dust settle for a day or two before I made my appearance. I spent that afternoon pacing my apartment, my phone clutched in my hand. It felt like the longest day of my life. Every few minutes, I'd check my email, hoping for an update from David. Finally, at 4:30 p.m., the email arrived. The subject line was simple: "It's done." I opened it, my heart pounding. The message was brief. "All documents signed. Funds have been transferred to her account. The keys are in my possession. Congratulations, Tabitha. You are the proud new owner of the Gilded Lily and the sole tenant of its premises. I'll drop the keys off to you this evening." I read the email 3 times. It was real. After all the planning, the secret negotiations, and the gut-wrenching tension, it was finally over. I owned it. The physical space that had been the backdrop for so much of my family's judgment, the symbol of their real-world success, was now mine. I walked over to my window and looked out at the city. It felt different somehow. The future of Hearth and Root, my future, had just been unlocked. The contracts had been signed in the shadows, but soon, everything would be brought into the light. And I had a feeling the fireworks would be spectacular. The plan was to let a few days pass before the big reveal. David had formally notified Brenda's lawyer that Northwood Holdings Group would be taking possession of the property over the weekend to assess the space for renovations. Brenda had been given until Friday at 5 p.m. to remove any personal effects from the store. This would give her a quiet, dignified exit, allowing her to say goodbye to her shop without any drama. The drama, I had decided, would come later. The family grapevine, however, works faster than any formal notice. On Saturday morning, Jessica posted a long, sentimental tribute to the Gilded Lily on her Instagram. It was a slideshow of old photos, Jessica as a little girl in the shop, Brenda cutting a ribbon at the grand opening, a recent, artfully filtered shot of the storefront. The caption was a masterpiece of self-congratulation disguised as grief. "So sad to see this chapter close," she wrote. "My mom poured her heart and soul into this beautiful store, a true Main Street icon. So proud of her for knowing when it's time to move on to bigger and better things. We're excited for what the future holds." The comments section was flooded with sympathy and praise for Brenda's brave decision. It was the perfect setup. They were publicly framing the narrative as a graceful retirement, a choice. They had no idea the new owners were already inside, measuring for new walls and planning the demolition of the old ones. That evening was Brenda's pre-planned farewell dinner. It wasn't a somber affair. In their telling, this wasn't a failure. It was a strategic pivot. They had invited the whole family to their house to celebrate Mom's next adventure. My grandfather called and insisted I come. "You should be there, Tabby," he said gently. "She's your aunt." I knew he was right. I couldn't hide forever. It was time. I arrived at Brenda's house, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs. I was a different person than the one who had shrunk under their condescension at the last family dinner. I was now their landlord. I was their successor. I walked in and the scene was just as I'd imagined. Brenda was holding a glass of champagne, laughing loudly as she recounted stories of her early days in the shop. Jessica was flitting around, phone in hand, capturing content for her followers. When they saw me, the atmosphere shifted slightly. Brenda's smile became a little more fixed. "Tabitha, darling, so glad you could make it," she said, giving me an air kiss. Jessica looked me up and down, a faint smirk on her lips. "Hey, Tabby, come to pay your respects to Real Retail." I ignored the jab. "I wanted to congratulate you, Aunt Brenda," I said, my voice calm and even. "It's the end of an era." "Thank you, dear," she said, preening slightly. "It was just time. The new owners are some big investment firm. They want to keep the spirit of the store alive, which is lovely." This was my opening. I took a deliberate sip of the water I was holding. The room had fallen quiet, everyone sensing a shift in the evening's programmed narrative. "Actually," I began, my voice clear and carrying through the room, "I think they have some different plans for the space." Jessica scoffed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "And what would you know about it? Honestly, Tabby, nobody takes your little online business seriously enough to know what a real investment firm does." My aunt chuckled, a soft, indulgent sound, as if her daughter had just told a clever joke at my expense. The words from my story's title, the moment it was all building towards. It was perfect. I held their gaze, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat longer than was comfortable. I looked from Jessica's smug face to Brenda's amused one. "Good thing I don't need their approval," I said, my voice dropping slightly, losing its gentle edge and gaining a core of steel. "Especially since I just bought your store." The silence that followed was profound. It was so complete that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Brenda's smile froze, then slowly dissolved into a mask of utter confusion. Jessica's smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed disbelief. What did you just say?" Brenda stammered. "Northwood Holdings Group, the investment firm that bought the Gilded Lily? That's my company," I stated plainly. "I own the business, the inventory, the fixtures, and more importantly, I hold the 10-year lease on the building. Consider yourselves former employees, I suppose, though you did clear out your desks on time, so thank you for that." Jessica was the first to find her voice. "You're lying," she spat, her face pale. "There's no way, you can't afford that." "My business, the one you called a cute hobby, is more profitable than the Gilded Lily has been in a decade," I said, refusing to back down. I didn't just afford it. It was a sound, strategic investment for my brand's expansion. The new flagship store and studio for Hearth and Root will be opening on Main Street in 3 months, right after the renovations. Brenda looked like she had been slapped. All the grand hostess energy, the performative grace, it all evaporated. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and dawning comprehension. She sank onto a nearby sofa as if her legs could no longer support her. "But how?" she whispered. "You were desperate," I said, not unkindly. "You signed the papers. It was a fair offer. It was, in fact, the only offer. You can walk away debt-free. I'd call that a win." My grandfather, who had been watching the entire exchange with a stunned but slowly growing smile, finally spoke. "She's right, Brenda," he said, his voice full of quiet pride. "It was a business deal, and it sounds like my granddaughter knows a thing or two about business." The rest of the party imploded. The celebration was over. The guests, sensing the immense family schism that had just cracked wide open, started to make their excuses and slip away. Jessica was furious, alternating between calling me a traitor and a liar. Brenda was silent, staring into the middle distance, the entire narrative of her life's work having been rewritten in the span of 5 minutes. She hadn't passed the torch. She had been foreclosed on by the very person she'd pitied. The evening ended not with a celebratory toast, but with the quiet, awkward shuffling of people abandoning a sinking ship. I walked out of that house, leaving the wreckage of their pride behind me, and for the first time, I felt the cool, clean air of Main Street as my own. The aftermath of that night was a mixture of frosty silence and explosive gossip. News of the takeover spread through our town like wildfire. The story morphed with each telling, but the core facts remained. Brenda's boutique had been bought out from under her by her own niece, the quiet one with the internet business nobody understood. For a few weeks, I was the villain in the story for some, the savvy hero for others. My aunt and cousin refused to speak to me. Any attempt I made to reach out was met with a wall of silence. Jessica blocked me on all social media platforms, and according to mutual acquaintances, was on a tirade about how I had cruelly and deliberately destroyed her mother's dream. I didn't let it bother me. I was too busy building my own. The renovations on the Main Street property began immediately. The dated floral wallpaper and creaky wooden shelves of the Gilded Lily were the first things to go. We stripped the space back to its beautiful historic bones, exposed brick walls, original tin ceilings, and wide plank floors. My architect and I designed a space that was the physical embodiment of the Hearth and Root brand, minimalist, warm, and filled with natural light. The front of the store became a stunning showroom, with clean lines, custom-built birchwood displays, and a scent bar where customers could experience our signature fragrances. The back was transformed into a bustling, efficient hub of creativity and commerce. We built out a dedicated studio for candle pouring and textile dyeing, and a fulfillment center that streamlined our shipping process to a fine art. I hired my first 2 employees, a retail manager for the showroom and a production assistant for the studio. Watching them work in the new space, their energy and enthusiasm filling the rooms, was more satisfying than I could ever have imagined. My grandfather, Arthur, was a frequent visitor. He'd come by with coffee and donuts for the construction crew, his eyes shining with pride as he watched the transformation. "You see, Tabby," he said to me one afternoon, running his hand over a newly installed countertop his old workshop would have been proud of. "You didn't just buy a store, you buoy. A legacy, real, solid, and on your own terms." His validation was the only family approval I had ever truly needed. The grand opening of the Hearth and Root flagship store was 3 months later. We sent out invitations to local media, business owners, and our top customers in the area. The response was overwhelming. The night of the opening, the store was packed with people. They marveled at the design, sampled the products, and universally praised the transformation of the space. They saw what I had seen all along: potential, growth, and the future of retail, which was a seamless blend of online presence and in-person experience. Standing in the middle of the crowded showroom, watching people engage with the brand I had poured my life into, I felt an incredible sense of peace and accomplishment. About an hour into the event, I saw 2 familiar figures hesitating by the large front window, peering inside. It was Brenda and Jessica. They looked small and out of place, standing on the outside looking in. They must have seen the crowd and heard the buzz from down the street. For a long moment, they just stood there, observing the vibrant scene inside the building that was once theirs. Jessica seemed angry, her arms crossed tightly. But Brenda's expression was different. It was a complex mix of resentment, shock, and something that looked almost like respect. She was seeing, for the first time, the reality of my success. It wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet or boxes being shipped from an apartment. It was this: a beautiful, thriving physical space filled with customers and life. It was undeniable. I considered going to the door, of extending an olive branch, but I decided against it. My actions had already said everything that needed to be said. The proof of my seriousness, my capability, and my vision was all around them. It was in the ringing of the cash register, the hum of happy conversation, and the warm glow emanating from the store onto Main Street. After a few minutes, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I don't know if our family will ever fully heal. Perhaps some rifts are too deep to mend, but as I look to the future, I'm not focused on that. My focus is on what's next for Hearth and Root. The boutique hotel contract has been a massive success, and we're now in talks with 2 other hotel chains. We've launched a subscription box service that's sold out in its first week. The flagship store is exceeding all its sales projections. I have built something real, something that provides jobs, creates beautiful products, and brings me an immense sense of purpose. I proved to my family, and more importantly to myself, that a dream pursued with passion and intelligence is not a hobby. It's an empire in the making. And its headquarters are right here, on Main Street, in the very building where I was once told to get a real job.